Hey Rockstars, I'm JB, expert salesperson and master presenter.
I'm the doctor, psychologist, and behavioral expert.
This is the Entrepreneur Mastery Lab podcast.
We're high-performance coaches that help service-based professionals and entrepreneurs take their skills to the next level.
70% of entrepreneurs fail, which is why every week we have real talk with real entrepreneurs to help ensure you are not one of them.
We're also the inventors of the Be Rich mindset,
where we rise to mastery,
inspire greatness,
celebrate knowledge,
and help others along the way.
So join us in the lab.
And now, on to the show.
What is up, Rockstars? Welcome back to the Entrepreneur Mastery Lab. I'm JB.
I'm the doctor.
You know, if this happens to be your first time joining us, you are in for a treat. We are super pumped to have you here. Make sure that you give us a like, a follow, a subscribe, a 5-star review, whatever it happens to be. And if you're a returning viewer, you've already done all that, haven't you?
Better have. We'll come find you.
Is that a threat? You can't be making threats. This is being recorded.
That wasn't a threat. That was a promise.
That was cheesy is what that was. But seriously, if you're coming back again, thank you so much for joining us. Our goal here is to always leave a greater impact with more people. We have real interviews with real professionals. And as always, we're super excited to be able to bring that to you. So give us the love so we can spread the gospel to more and more people just like you. And hopefully you'll take something great out of this conversation today, like you always do.
If you're coming back, you know that we're cheesy and you must love it. You must love cheese as much as my dog does.
I feel like we're already off the rails and we're not even past the introduction here. That's
why we have a great guest to save us.
I am excited to bring our guest on here. We've got the fabulous Betty Monroe, CEO of Connective Engagement and a current film and television actress, as well as acting coach. Betty, welcome to the lab.
Hello. I'm actually just laughing at Andre's bad dad jokes already here. This is making my morning.
I know. Well, you know, for me, it's a blessing because normally he's just making fun of me. So at least right now it's not directed at me. I'll take it. It's a win.
Yeah.
Give me time.
This is great. Starting my Friday with smiles. That's a good thing.
It is. Well, we're really excited to have you, Betty. Thanks again for joining us. I know you're on the tail end of kicking a cold, so really do appreciate you being able to make it today on the show. Do our listeners and viewers a favor and just kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. I know I kind of introduced you, Connective Engagements, and you're in the acting industry, but share a little bit more about kind of who you are and what you do. I think that'll be really helpful.
Absolutely. So I coach those using a virtual meeting space to connect with people and create more genuine relationships, i.e. create better camera engagement, since most of us these days have found ourselves working on Zoom or the like to conduct business, which was not the norm and now is.
Seems very appropriate, you know, given that we've seen so much movement online. I kind of want to know what prompted you to move into the space, because it's something that we certainly see all the time. You know, being in the virtual space is it's hard to engage with people.
Yeah, it is. That's a great question, Josh. As you mentioned, I am a film and TV actress part-time. I'm a former elementary school teacher, single mom, wear a lot of hats. I just sent my college junior back off to school this morning, which made me cry a little, but that's okay. I have a clean guest room again and my home office back, which is kind of nice. I was working out of my bedroom for 4 months. But in any event, for a couple of years, I was actually producing and marketing a sales enablement-based podcast. And that started a bit before the pandemic. And as we moved into the pandemic and Zoom became a thing, I started seeing my sellers really struggling in the space. And as a film and TV actress, I thought, well, gosh, I can really help people. The joke was we'd see people with their, screens tilted so far back you could see up their nose, or they were dark, or you couldn't see them, or they had a bunch of clutter behind them. The initial jokes. And sadly, some people still haven't figured it out. I even hosted a webinar during that time period where someone ate a full steak dinner on camera. So, the virtual aesthetics became glaringly important. But then as we moved forward, I started seeing, as you mentioned, people really struggling with that interpersonal connection, especially in the B2B sales tech space, when you're working with prospects and clients and figuring out, well, gosh, how on earth do I do what I've done for 10, 15, 20 years with face-to-face and building relationships with people. And I don't have that face-to-face anymore. But you can. And it's simply about adjusting the way you connect, right? Connective engagement came to me simply because that's what we need to learn how to do. And it's not just a result of the pandemic. It's a result of too much technology sometimes. You know, my own young adult kids struggle with socialization and all of this stuff happening in our world right now. And it's kind of affected everybody, whether you're 16 or 56.
It's tough. I mean, and for all the skeptics out there, what you are saying is, yes, you can actually engage in online, and you can do it as well as you can do in person, or is there still a gap there?
Close to. Look, we all want to go back in person, and many of us have, yet many have still opted to, this isn't going anywhere. Bottom line, this is not going anywhere because it's saving companies millions of dollars in former travel expenses. It is easier for people. People are able to, pardon me, people are able to spend more time with their families and all the wonderful pros that have come out of it. So it's not going anywhere. And yes, you can. It's just different. We maybe have to learn how to read body language in a very different and more nuanced and finite manner, as opposed to, you know, watching somebody's whole body stance. But it can be done. Simple things like showing your hands occasionally when you're on screen. I talk with my hands anyway, coming from a Brooklyn-based Jewish family, but but doing that actually builds trust. And why? How many times have some of our listeners or even you guys been on a prospective call in the last couple of years meeting somebody you've never met before, and you're on camera and you turn on your meeting and their screen is black? And what that says is, without meaning to, what it says, and I get the uncomfortable part, and that's something for another time, but what it says to the person that you're meeting with is that whatever it is they're doing that you can't see is far more important than the meeting that you've planned together. So these are things to think about.
So do we need to kind of learn how to do this? I mean, is there a serious learning curve to getting better on camera? Because, you know, we've all seen the lawyer with the cat filter on Zoom talking to the judge. I mean, if we haven't seen that video, you all owe it to yourself to watch that video. Go look for it right now. But yeah, we've all seen that. So how much of a learning curve do you think there really is to getting good on the camera?
I don't think it's about so much, Josh, being good as being self-aware of the constant ebb and flow and changes taking place in not only our personal lives, but our business lives due to the pandemic. So I think a lot of people have figured it out, but a lot of people still haven't, and a lot of people are still struggling. You know, this being on camera all day is exhausting for everybody, even the most seasoned professional. You know, and Zoom fatigue is a real thing. So a nice part of bringing that self-awareness in, whether you are an employee, a seller, or even a team leader or manager, or a head of an organization, is maintaining an awareness of all of the things that are involved. You know, everyone is still getting used to the fact that their naked 4-year-old is maybe going to come running behind them in the middle of a meeting that's set up this way. Like, you know, with a CEO and 10 important people going, "Mommy, I'm Superman." And it's okay to laugh, and it's okay for your dog to come in or your cat to decide to come in and sit on top of your screen, because that's just kind of where we are now if you're meeting virtually. And I think people, as it's been over 2.5 years now, are getting more and more used to these things. But what we need to do is learn how to bring those things back in, you know.
One of the things I've seen, you know, personally, is you kind of have this expectation on camera for a lot of people, right? People who have not grown up on camera. So I'm thinking, you know, kind of like your middle or older generations, you know, they kind of want this real formality to what's on camera. And then you've got kind of this younger generation that's totally open to being authentic. I had a conversation just yesterday with a realtor that's, you know, I'm goofy. They know my grandma and her cooking, and, you know, they're part of my lives when I go online and I'm on social media and I'm on camera. And I think there's like this difference between kind of some of the older generations and the younger generations. Is one of them right or wrong? Is it somewhere in the middle? Kind of what's your feeling with your experience on where we should kind of find that Goldilocks space on camera?
It's very simple. I know it can be hard for people who have done things one way for many years. I get that. And I understand your concern with the generational gap, so to speak. But this is the thing. We're all human beings being human, and we're all in the same boat on the same sea. And we've now had enough time to kind of adjust to what this is. And you need to be yourself, because in order to achieve the genuine connection through a screen, as opposed to face-to-face, reading someone's body language, eye-to-eye contact, blah, 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 you have to be able to be yourself. You know, that's why I have my family photos behind me. I'm in my kitchen. This is my home. It's really important. And when you are in a position where you're in meetings with people perhaps you don't know well, these things behind me might be a really great conversation starter. And the other thing is, people are so overwhelmed with everything going on in the world right now. It is important for us to recognize that it's that personalization needs to come first at the beginning of any meeting, you know, and not just about the weather. How's the weather? You know, the photo behind me might become a conversation piece, or, you know, just let somebody know I'm a parent, or anything like that. There's so many different pieces to the puzzle. And I think it's just a tough thing. And it's time and experience and just repetitive motion, doing it again and again. You know, but it's kind of correlative to many people are exhausted, like I said, from being on camera all the time. And sometimes it is okay to not be on camera. And that's a whole different subject, you know, that pertains to whatever's going on within your office space or your organization and how you set up your meetings. But when you do have them this way, yes, it's important to just be you, be self-aware, be authentic, be genuine, because that's how you build relationships in the first place, whether you're in person or otherwise.
I can totally relate. My background is what's actually going on in my head all the minutes of every day. Perfect conversation.
That's
I
what
love that.
inside your head looks like. It's terrifying.
Right?
And for all our listeners that are wondering what we're talking about, you better just jump on YouTube and check out one of our episodes on YouTube, because you get a much better feel for what we're all looking at here. It's absolutely horrifying.
It is not.
Betty, I'm trying to get them to go on YouTube.
Are you talking?
He's sitting to Dr. Andre.
I'm just concerned. Like, the horrifying part is my background or the face in front of it. What you going for here, JB?
Hey,
Both are
you
accurate.
know what?
Both are accurate.
You know, I'm trying to be empathetic. Taking lessons from Betty here. You know, I love you, brother. I got nothing to say about that. Just zipped up.
I think everybody's brain feels like that at some point, especially these days.
Well, for sure, it's a lot, and I feel like the introduction to technology, and the doc and I talk about this all the time, it can add to the noise and the distractions. It can make life harder. We think it's easier, but it's harder. You know, we're constantly getting distracted by technology, and even virtually, you probably see this. You probably coach on this. It's like, you know, when you have a dozen, you know, different browser screens open, you know, and you've got all these tabs open, you know, how distracting can that be? You know, they start flashing, or you got this or that going on. It can be really pretty tough. So I'm sure you've seen that. I got to ask, since you coach on this, any stories where people have just made you kind of like, oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, I told you, the guy that ate the steak dinner on the whole, in the middle of the webinar, there's like 100 people in this webinar, and this ding-a-ling is eating a steak dinner with baked potato on camera, chewing on camera, just listening. I'm like, now that's a time where you can turn your camera off. That's okay. Turn it off, please. Just listen.
So this is like the equivalent of going to the movie theater with Chinese food in your bag or something. Like, I feel like it's the same thing. There should be if Seinfeld was out, this would be a Seinfeld episode. You know, somebody doing something like that.
Look, I mean, we could all make the very inappropriate joke about the Jeffrey Toobin story, but, you know, I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, the old joke about the guy standing up and forgetting that he's got boxers on and, you know, whoops, forgot to turn my camera off to go to the bathroom. I mean, these things have happened. They've happened to me. They've happened to people I know. You know, it just happens.
It's a very odd way to try to let somebody know you're into them. It's like, oops, I stood up and I only have boxers on. How shocking.
Yeah. Be mindful. Be mindful. It takes 7 seconds to form a first impression. That's not a great impression if you're on a meeting with someone you don't know, even if it's someone you do know.
So I got a question for you. What would you say would be the best tip you can give somebody to do when they're starting out in a new Zoom meeting and we want to make a good impression? What would be your top tip?
Are you referring to someone who's never been on one before, or just someone who's meeting someone for the first time?
Either or. Open-ended.
Okay,
You
well,
can have fun with it. I just really needed a segue to eat a chip really loudly on the
that's
screen.
okay. I love you for making me laugh. This is good. This is a good thing.
I'm going for prop comedy today.
In regard to, the first impression thing, look, again, it takes people 7 seconds to form a first impression of someone when meeting for the first time. And so, the way you dress, the way you show up is very important. Personally, my opinion is the virtual backgrounds can also be distracting and an issue. And sometimes they're a filter. So people forget and they'll lean back or lose a body part, and they're okay. I get it. We're all stuck. Some people, what if you live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Soho and you've got this much space, use the blurred out background. That's fine. Just remember not to go like this so we don't lose you. But the way you dress is something that's important. No, we don't have to wear a suit and tie anymore. If that's your thing, do it. But it's not necessary anymore. Button-down shirt, polo shirt, clean t-shirt, look neat and clean, look professional, as whatever is the most appropriate to whom it is you're meeting, right? But yeah, it's really important to take the time. It was very tempting in the beginning for everybody to show up, and people did in their, I joke, SpongeBob pajama bottoms, right? Sitting on their bed, right? But also, full circle with that, the way you dress up and show up directly affects your ability to complete whatever it is you're attempting to get to in a day, right? So you don't have to get fancy, but make sure you take a minute to brush the hair, put on a clean shirt. We're lucky. It's nice that we can have a bit of a relaxed moment in time, so to speak, but it's important to still present yourself as you want to be perceived.
You brought up being aware. Which makes total sense, right? I mean, just be aware. But in our experience, working with a lot of people, self-awareness, and this is personal experience too, right? Self-awareness is really hard to come by. So do you think most people realize that they need to be more self-aware? Or when you're working with people, is it kind of like a realization like, oh my gosh, it didn't even occur to me to think about that? I'm just curious how you've experienced that working with people so far.
I think that depends on the individual. Self-awareness
Doc loves you.
Subject for
he
the
loves
doc,
you.
right?
It depends, right? It depends. His favorite.
The doc.
I mean, have had both of you on the show.
Do you agree, Andre? I mean, I think listen. Self-awareness takes time, work, desire to achieve, and an ability to see with the third eye, right? So, but it's tough. Like I said, there's people. If you are used to going into an office from 9 to 5 every single day for 25 years, then all of a sudden you're forced to learn new technology, figure this out. Oh my gosh, I'm used to, I'm a salesman that's been doing this for 30 years and now I have to figure this mess out. That's scary. And it's frustrating and it's, time consuming, but again, it's going to depend on the person.
Doc, you have anything you want to say? You biting your tongue here?
JB hates that answer, so you might not know that, Betty. But my answer for everything is always depends. So what does this do?
Each person is a unique individual,
right? Josh, because we are all unique, and one size does not fit all.
No.
So we really have to play to the audience, which is what we do. And he does that setup for me because he agrees the same thing. But he always gives me that nice setup, so I appreciate that.
I do. I don't. One of our core values is, one size does not fit all. You gotta find what works for you and what's best for you. A lot of times, I find it's very helpful to have some outside perspective to shed some light, on you as an individual when you're working through something, because that's where a lot of times the blind spots come out in the first place. So you can work on yourself, and that's where I question how aware people really are. But this is an interesting topic to me, if only because, Betty, you're coming from a place where you've been in front of the camera for many, many, many years. So you've really kind of had firsthand experience to get really good at this, and what comes very naturally for you probably doesn't come all that naturally for a lot of people who are maybe stepping into the camera for the first few times over the last couple of years. And developing some habits that maybe aren't the best habits to develop. You know, I hate to use sports analogies, but it's kind of like you go to a golf pro, and golf pros love people who've never golfed before because you don't know to do, you know, what's right and what's wrong. So they just teach you what's right instead of having to try to fix all the things you do wrong. What's your experience been, you know, being in front of the camera for many years as an actress? Kind of how's that translate to helping people? I'm sure it gives you a huge edge up in trying to get people to that level of ability to be. And I know you said not good, right? It's not about being good in front of the camera, but being able to engage better, to being able to build trust better, you know, kind of the aspects of creating a connection.
Yes. Chances are, thanks for saying that, Josh. I mean, chances are, if you're in a Zoom meeting with somebody, you're there for a reason. Okay. Whether you're meeting somebody new as a prospective client, or you are doing a current deal with somebody, or you're meeting a patient, or you are working with someone to sell a home, who's perhaps out of town and buying a home, you know, this way, which is something that's now available that maybe couldn't have been as easy to do, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But excuse me, we don't know what we don't know. And it takes time to learn new things. And the nice thing about, as far as the virtual aesthetics or the appearance, it's easy. Teaching somebody how to set their camera up, how to use a riser, how to put the light in front of them so it's coming towards them is the simplest thing. You want to be the most important thing on the screen so that whomever it is you're speaking to can connect to you in the best way possible, given that we are not face to face, right? It's not a hugely complicated thing, but for some people who don't know what they don't know, it can seem like that until I come in and say, look, here's a lamp, let's place it here, let's turn your desk this way, let's get your computer up on a riser, and done, voila. You know, if you're comfortable using a background, use a background. If you're comfortable not, don't. You know, it's common sense, but yet, you know, if you don't know what you don't know, you got to learn it.
Do you think people experience stage fright in front of like a Zoom camera? Right? If I'm going on a stage in front of people, right? So you do, yeah.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter how many. Of course, Meryl Streep still gets stage fright. She's the first person to say that in every interview. It's normal, and especially for people who aren't used to it. It's easier for someone like me who does this on a more regular basis and is used to kind of being under the quote microscope of a camera. But as I mentioned earlier, it can indeed be exhausting. Here's a great subject. So, you know, one of the things I like to do when I'm working with leadership is, you know, the people who are planning virtual meetings for their employees and their organizations, bringing an awareness of, okay, in the beginning, it was great because one of the pros was that productivity went through the roof, right? Great. We were able to do so many things. But then what happened after a while, it leveled out and people were getting yelled at. Oh, well, you're not meeting your deadlines and you're not doing this. Why? Because people were planning, instead of the usual maybe 1 or 2 in-person meetings people used to have, they were planning 10 of them in a day with no time limit, no space in between. And then there's no time to do anything else. Yes, meeting with people face-to-face, especially when you're a seller or a service provider, is imperatively important, right? But it can't be the only thing because we have a whole world of things that need to come together. Every cog in the wheel is important, right? Or it's not going to go. So, you know, bringing that kind of awareness, especially when either you yourself are planning the meetings or you are in a leadership position and you're responsible for it for your team, bringing that awareness and shortening those meetings, maximizing maybe 5 meetings per day at the most and a minimum of 30-minute meetings. That's it. Changing the way you address your staff meetings if people are going to be in a situation where they're on Zoom or you're in a hybrid situation. Recognizing when employees should or shouldn't be on camera or can or don't have to be. All these little pieces come together to kind of make that conducive.
Have you seen a shift where Zoom is being used unnecessarily versus in person or phone? And do you think there's certain things that really shouldn't be held? And I say Zoom, but you know, virtually. Yeah. Are there certain topics or types of meetings where you're like, hey, there's just no purpose here? So when you're talking to leaders and executives, it's like kind of, hey, are we doing an analysis of what's really appropriate to do virtually versus not?
I mean, again, that's going to depend on the unique situation. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing. It's allowed organizations to acquire talent from all over the world that may be a better fit than the person that's 3 blocks away. Okay. It's allowed, as I said, people to spend more time with family, people to be more engaged in a way that we haven't been able to in a long time. But as I mentioned, this isn't going anywhere because the pros far outweigh the cons. I don't think there's necessarily an inappropriate time. However, there are times when it is okay for people to step away from the camera. Like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, if you're having a staff meeting and you've got a staff of 25, make it an asynchronous environment. Send out a white paper and say, okay, these are the things I'd like to touch. You guys throw in your 2 cents, take 4 or 5 days to look at it, and then I'll get back to you and we'll break the meeting into 30-minute segments so that only those who are pertinent to the subject matter at hand have to be on camera. If you want to listen, feel free to listen and do what you got to do behind the camera. So those kinds of things are a great shift, but I don't think it's ever inappropriate. I think it's great. Personally, I wouldn't have met you had it not been for this platform. So, of course, as human beings, we need that in-person, face-to-face, tangible, energetic connection. It's just how we're wired, but this has allowed us so many wonderful things. I can do this with my friend in Australia and talk to her. It's just better. I think there's a lot of wonderful aspects to it as an option.
Doc, I'm curious. You about to say something? Because I got a question for you.
Go ahead. Fire away.
All right. I just wanted
Is that the answer?
11 billion, right? Betty mentioned something about, it's still helpful and we still crave kind of the in-person human connection. Is there in your mind an appropriate, I don't know, length of time or an inappropriate length of time to go between meeting somebody in person? Like, can you really get to the same place without meeting somebody in person? I guess would be the real basis of this question. And if not, how long should you hold off, right? Because we got a lot of professionals that are meeting with people virtually and they're trying to build that relationship. Should I be seeing them once a year? Should it be twice a year? And I know the answer is going to be, it depends, but I'm just kind of, if there's some insight you might be able to offer on your end.
I'm going to throw you for a loop. I'm not going to say depends.
Wow.
I couldn't think of a good synonym, so I'll just go into. So actually, this is where we go back to something Betty said earlier that I think is super important. Leaning to the generational differences, right? This is where I'll speak for myself as some of the older person in the room, sometimes get stuck on this idea of virtual meeting and connection. We can really look to the youth today and learn a good lesson. They are able to become friends with people all over and never meet, and bond and get some really great friendships, stronger friendships than some of the people that we know in person. And I work with some youth with that in private practice and get, always have that connection to like, well, did you ever plan to meet them? Like, yeah, maybe someday we'll meet, but that has no connection necessary to that friendship or their relationship. And it's just a different generational thing. So we're so used to meeting in person, we didn't grow up with virtual meetings. We didn't grow up with Zoom calls. We didn't grow up with any of these things. So to really build that connection was meeting that person in person. And that was all we had to do. So now it's shifting that mindset to know that it is okay to do that. And there is a big separation from generations I see in that. When I talk to some of their parents and they're like, how do they have friends? They're not real friends. How do they date that way too? Engage to people that they've never met in person, which is, crazy to us when I say that out loud. It sounds so weird, but it's so normal in this younger generation. So it's just shifting that mindset a little bit to see that it is a different world. And just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's necessary. So I don't know if that answered your question directly about time, but I think it really depends on how comfortable you are with that and what kind of level that you can kind of connection that you feel. So it is possible. There is still a great thing about human connection. It is the ability to actually put that face to the person and have that context. But I don't think it's necessary to have that kind of relationship anymore once you can get past that idea.
It's interesting because what I'm hearing is theoretically there's no need to meet in person ever, depending on who you're on the other side of the camera with, right? If it's somebody who's really comfortable virtually, the need might never be there. And I can actually, I can speak from somewhat personal experience, having a young son, an 8-year-old son, who one of his best friends is somebody he knows online, who's the cousin of one of his other friends. He's never met the kid in person and may never meet him in person, but they are very close. They know a whole lot about each other. So, right to your point.
It's just a different world.
It is. And I think it's an adjustment period. And as I mentioned, you know, one of my favorite things to say regarding this whole current climate, especially in the business world, is, and in the personal world actually, is that it is a constant ebb and flow. And change is just inevitable. And it's a hard thing. People are hesitant to be comfortable outside their comfort zone, right? So it's about stepping outside the box and being able to recognize this is kind of where we are in our time. And it's just, okay, take a breath, sit back, and figure out what works best for you.
Before we're out of time, I do want to touch on a topic because I think this is something that Betty and I are very in synergy with, and that's the idea of empathy, especially around the workplace and dealing with people. So I'd love to hear some insight from you, Betty, on your thoughts on empathy, because I'm sure our listeners have heard me talk about it enough. So I'd love to get something that we're connected to.
If it's okay, I'd like to read something, because I just so happened to post something this morning on LinkedIn, and it was a repost because I thought it was so pertinent to just kind of where everyone is right now. You know, empathy is such a key piece to building any form of relationship, but it's also important to be able to be empathic to build a healthy relationship with yourself, right? To be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand how they're feeling, even if you are not in that space personally at that time, is such a key to being able to be a human being human. I can't say it enough times. And what I had said was, pardon my old eyes, I have to make it big because I'm blind even with bifocal contacts. allowing yourself to be empathic and vulnerable opens you up to genuine human connections. It can be hard, but so can shiny surfaces that appear perfect and impenetrable. It's what's underneath the surface holding it together that matters and holds the most truth. So in regard to being an actress, that makes perfect sense. In regard to being a human, that makes sense. In the business world, I always love to say there's this huge disparity between a leader and a boss. We've all heard that, right? And the leaders are going to take an empathic stance and create empathy within the workplace to build employee morale and recognize that all these crazy changes that have gone on that have been huge for people, and they've happened quickly in the last 2.5 years, have had a significant effect. Being isolated for the first year, even further, you know, completely changing the way they worked, going from being in their office from 9 to 5, 5 days a week, to being at home for months at a time. All these things are huge changes and they affect us. So having empathy for what everyone's going through, you know, recognizing that, again, Zoom fatigue is a thing. It can really cause issues. People have experienced much higher levels, I'm sure you know this, Andre, of depression and a need for therapy because of the months and months and months of isolation, which we are not meant to be isolative creatures. You know, and being that we did have to visit this way, even with family members for the first 8, 10, 12 months, you know, out of safety and concern. So all these things have had a significant effect on people, regardless of age. And our babies, our little ones, they're not calling them COVID babies. So they're used to seeing people with a mask on their face. Well, for heaven's sakes, communication is key to me in my entire career, whether I'm acting in front of a camera, coaching, or teaching. So that's been a tough one for me. So empathy is just, I think, the most important thing, an ability to be empathic towards whatever particular situation is affecting the people closest to you.
I always like to be clear too, because I think that misconception of empathy for people is that you have to be in agreement with someone when you have empathy for them, and that's the whole key of empathy. Is you don't have to agree with what they're saying, you don't have to like what they're saying, you don't even have to buy into what they're saying. Empathy just says that you understand that they have a point of view, and that's their point of view. And if you just have empathy that is their point of view, it doesn't have to be in alignment with yours. It's just knowing that they're different, or they're them, and that's their view, and that's okay. And that's where empathy really stems from. So it doesn't mean you have to agree or be in alignment with them. It just means that you have some understanding.
Am I a little out of line here in saying, correct me, please, because I just feel like the virtual setting, the online world has removed, reduced, or eliminated a ton of empathy out there, and it's a major issue today. Am I off base here? I mean, is this kind of something that you see in your practice?
I think it's a whole separate issue. I think it's pertinent to just kind of how the world is working, period, as Andre mentioned earlier. And this is totally off topic for me, but I think in regard to empathy as a whole, yeah, it's made it very hard for people to connect because the younger generation is so used to connecting this way, right? Which is fine and wonderful. But, nothing can take the place of a conversation, an actual conversation. Texting has its time and place. Meeting virtually has its time and place. But yet, in the end, and I'm sure, Andre, I would assume you would agree with me, given your background, that eventually that face-to-face does need to eventually happen at some point. Not all the time. This can work, but yeah, I mean, empathy has become a difficult thing because of many other reasons, which is completely off topic, regarding instant gratification and the way the world has just kind of shifted due to the technology, the TikTok, the Instagram, etc.
That goes back to why I preach empathy so much, is because we're very divided in a lot of ways, and that gets highlighted online. I think that's what, JB, you're kind of hinting at too, is like some of that, the anger and openness to attack without those filters, the same way you wouldn't do in person, because of that safety of the distance and anonymity a lot of times. That's where the empathy even has more value, because if you see someone doing that, your natural inclination is to attack back. But if you have some empathy, you can say, hey, that person's just going through something I don't understand, or I don't know. Let me pull away from that.
I think in regard to the business world, it's, when I'm referring to it, it's, as I mentioned, right, raising the employee morale. And yes, you don't have to agree with it, but being empathic to the situation. And, yes, that 20 Zoom meetings is exhausting, and recognizing, oh, okay, maybe I need to rethink as a leader, not a boss, how I do this. Doesn't mean I have to agree, but I need to be self-aware and aware of the effect this is having within my organization, which is supposed to be an asynchronous environment. And it's going to produce the best result regarding ROI, business, morale within the workspace. And it's just going to make for a happier place, a less stressful environment, because everybody is under enough stress today, given everything we've talked about, period.
Absolutely. Been a great conversation. Yeah. Betty, is there something you have for our audience, or in a way for our audience to connect to you, that you would like to share with us?
Absolutely. I've actually just released a very brief virtual course that talks about most of what we discussed today. There's only 8 short modules, about 3, 4, 5 minutes each. And it is currently including a 30-minute free coaching session if you purchase it. And that can be found at my website, connectiveengagement.com, spelled just as it is. And you can follow me on LinkedIn anytime.
Awesome, Betty. Thank you. And I'm very grateful to hear you do have a way for our listeners to connect with you. You can't have a business called Connective Engagement and not have a way to connect. So that's a big one. Andre, you got a weird helmet going on there, man.
I mean, my big takeaway from today's episode is just really being aware of how you are on camera and making sure that you're, centered in the screen and very aware. So I really appreciate everything I've learned from Betty today.
Lovely, Andre.
I'm enjoying this prop humor. I mean, the people listening have no clue what's going on here.
The chips, the mic screen.
Fantastic.
It's really appreciated if you go on Zoom. That's why you go on YouTube to watch us.
Check us out.
Definitely entertaining. Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation, Betty. Thank you so much for joining us here in the lab, and really excited to continue to learn from you on the best ways to engage online and continue to build that human connection and explore empathy in myself and in the space at large. I think it's a big topic that's going to continue to be something we got to focus on moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Betty, and of course, all the information will always be in the show notes.
It's such an interesting topic, Doc, talking about engaging virtually, because we're all doing it, right? But how well are we really doing it? On a scale of 1 to 10, I think most of us would be like, oh, I'm an 8, a 9, or a 10, but are we really? I don't think most of us are.
We talk about intentionality a lot, and that's, I think, one area that we're not seeing a lot of people putting a lot of intention is when they're doing Zoom meetings. It's like afterthoughts for them. They think they get to relax. They think they get to kind of just be nonchalant around it. And that probably got away in the beginning because everyone was new to it. But now, like most things in business, it's evolved. Now you have to put that same energy and intention into it that you would any other kind of business meeting you would prepare for, any other kind of training you would prepare for, especially if you're networking and meeting someone new to try to do some business. You have to, I can go out on a whole aside. I watched somebody do a business meeting in my dentist's office on speaker on Zoom, and that was just probably the most unprofessional thing. Even if that person had a perfect product, I would never hire them because of what I watched them do. And just, also putting the other person's business out there in the middle of an office on speakerphone is not a good idea either. But yeah, I think that's putting more attention to it, being more aware. Like Betty was saying, awareness, I think, is going to go a long way for helping us get better at this.
Yeah. So if you've got a need and you feel like you get better virtually, building relationships, building trust, connecting with people, check out the show notes. Check out Betty. She's fantastic, great background, great experience, and really got some fantastic insight on how to do that. And again, if you're still listening, you're still watching us, and you haven't given us a like, a subscribe, a follow, or a 5-star review, go ahead and do it, please. We do this for you and to impact more people and be able to give you some good insight so you can take away something to get better in your life and your business today.
And remember, you can check us out on YouTube and watch our smiling faces do this, and you get to see my clever prop comedy.
It was cute.
Something like that. And also you can find us at jbandthedoctor.com and on all our social media at jbandthedoctor.
All right, everybody. In the meantime, don't forget, we do have a freebie out there, the 6 methods to make sure that your business doesn't fail. So if you are struggling or you're concerned about how your business is going to survive and exceed expectations and leave your competition in your dust, you might just want to check that out. Details in the show notes, or you can see it on the screen here on YouTube.
And of course, check out our free masterclass that's out there, our 7-minute masterclass, getting it done quickly on how to help increase your time. Quick strategy, not going to fail. And it's a little Halloween themed, and you're going to have a lot of fun with it. So check that out too. Of course, you can find us right in the show notes.
Yep. All right, everybody. JB out.
Peace out, yo.